Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now the last time we looked at the 3GB GTX 1060 it did okay, though it was clear that not only was the memory a limitation but the actual capability of the card was in decline. That said, it's still one of, if not the best 3GB card you can buy, and while it's tough to recommend doing so, I feel like it's important to keep an eye on it throughout 2023. This might just be the year that it succumbs to its ever diminishing abilities. There's no denying that one of these might surprise you, as I think my old video proved, with titles like Cyberpunk, Far Cry 6 and Red Dead still running fairly smoothly on Nvidia's cut down budget card. Today though, it's all about the latest games. We're living in a time when PC gamers are contemplating if 8GB cards are enough, and for the still supported 3GB 1060, I can imagine this is all a bit awkward. Let's not forget that we seem to be living in a time when games are also released now and then optimised later. Now, more powerful and modern 8, 12 and 16GB cards can push through such problems with brute force alone, but again, the 3GB 1060 doesn't have this luxury either. It's not awful, but the odds are stacked against it. Now, the only game I tested today not from 2023 is Halo Infinite, because I'm under the impression, or I was, that a recent update actually stopped sub 4GB cards from launching this altogether. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore, and although we still do get a warning, we can simply hit continue and ignore it. First time round this had some issues. I thought to myself, well, it's no wonder they stopped 3GB cards from running it. I mean, the tree textures were non-existent and the frame rate was terrible, but after taking the card out of the machine, applying some new thermal paste and reinstalling the latest drivers, the game actually ran quite well, albeit at the low settings. Cranking the settings up will no doubt destroy the frame rate, but the price of 3GB 1060s these days can still make them quite tempting if you're willing to seriously manage your expectations. Now though, let's move on to some really heavy hitters. The Last of Us Part 1 will throw up a VRAM warning after simply turning off FSR and playing at native 1080p with the lowest settings. This GPU couldn't hit 60 FPS here even if it had 16 gigs of memory, so I was willing to be satisfied with anything over 30. The 3GB 1060 exceeded my expectations. Now the game doesn't look awful, it sort of reminds me of the PS3 version. In some markets these cards will cost less than a 1050 Ti, and despite the lesser memory they should still do better. I'll make a comparison soon to find out if this assumption is accurate. I wanted to avoid FSR or any upscaling techniques in this video unless we were getting less than 30 FPS to show you what you can expect from one of these as it is without any help. Sons of the Forest next, and there will be a few little dips and drops. This isn't as demanding as The Last of Us, but it is a new game that can still be problematic for some hardware, especially as far as the percentile lows are concerned. Now despite this, it ran quite well overall, even with full texture resolution. Keeping the settings at minimum is a good idea to account for any aforementioned dips. Some things could have been pushed for medium, that's for sure, but if in doubt, low settings are always the way to start. Moving on to Hogwarts Legacy, and this is another troublesome modern release, but it has seen a few patches that have definitely improved things. Now with the 3GB 1060, a weird thing happens when you choose a higher texture setting. I was expecting to choose high and then watch as the game crawl to a halt, but after doing this and restarting, everything sort of reverted to low or lower than low quality. The game literally couldn't render the higher textures with this card. I saw this happening in real time. Choosing the high textures actually made the game look worse than it did with the default low textures selected from the graphics menu. Performance wise, the figures were actually pretty good overall. Hogsmeade and the surrounding areas didn't take as much of a toll on this card as I thought. It's still hanging in there. For my first Resident Evil 4 test I went with the lowest settings, and this meant at least 60 FPS. FSR is available if we want to use it of course, but as I said at the start I wanted to leave it off where possible. That was certainly possible here. No real issues here with solid figures across the board. Now this game lets us choose very specific levels of texture quality as well, so next I went for the high 3GB texture setting to see how things were impacted. You can choose the texture option based on how much VRAM your card has. Now it's safe to say that things did noticeably drop. The frame time graph became a bit more erratic and our figures became a little less consistent. It wasn't uncommon to see drops to just above 30 frames per second. The Dead Space remake doesn't agree all that much with the 3GB 1060, although the average frame rate wasn't less than 30, the frame times were very bad, making the game feel unplayable in a lot of areas. There was no consistency at all here. It still looks okay with the low settings, and I wouldn't mind the sacrifice if it made things playable, but this is one of those times when we are going to need FSR, no question about it, either that or a lower native res. Now, enabling FSR will nearly double the average frame rate, but truth be told, the 1.1% numbers aren't going to be all that much better. There was a little less stutter, but there was still some serious stutter. This isn't exactly the most well optimised game out there though, so I don't think the card is entirely to blame. Now, this could certainly be said for more than just this title, but ultimately, whether it's the lack of more memory or the game, perhaps both, the experience isn't going to be very good with this 3GB card. So finally, it's Jedi Survivor, which is still a little bit bugged. If you disable FSR, then the game still renders at a lower than native res for whatever reason. Now, to actually turn off upscaling completely, we have to raise the preset to epic, which of course the 1060 can't handle, and then we have to disable the FSR option before turning all the other graphical values down to the desired settings, in this case low. Now, this will mean that FSR actually gets turned off, but as you might have expected, this does not bode well for the 3GB card. I expected a little better here, but it seems like FSR is ultimately required in this case, just like with Dead Space. Trying to hit 60 FPS will require too much of a sacrifice. We're talking a lower resolution with more aggressive FSR. 1080p balanced was a kind of sweet spot that improved the average and the percentile lows. This made the game far more playable. It seems FSR has saved yet another card. In its own right though, native res will be hit or miss for the 3GB 1060 in 2023. It is still hanging on in there, just about, and doing a respectable job at trying, that's for sure. And some games will run absolutely fine, especially those released a couple or a few years ago. I'll hang on to this card and give it a chance at taking on the rest of this year's big releases to see how well it does, because I have a feeling that we are going to be limited to mostly low settings in most of the latest and greatest AAA titles. It's no secret that the 3GB 1060 is worse overall than the 6GB version. Not only does it have less memory, but it's also got less CUDA cores, and ultimately it's a completely different card underneath, and one that may still surprise you in 2023, but may still offer up some problems as well. As it seems, in 2023, even with some of the latest and greatest demanding AAA titles, the 3GB 1060 can still manage if you turn everything down quite far. Things are definitely subject to change. Let me know your thoughts, of course, in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, leave a dislike if you didn't. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.